Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Sam Dever Podcast, episode 88. In this episode, I speak with Seth Infinity Monk. Seth is a spirit guide, peace strategist, and a former Buddhist monk. I met Seth at a networking event, and the second I began talking to him, I knew he had to be a guest on this podcast, and I'm very grateful for him coming here tonight and sharing his wisdom. It was a brilliant conversation, to say the least. The book of the episode is going to be Here Now by Ram Dass. I have made this book of the episode before, but I thought hearing Seth's journey, it reminded me of Ram Dass when he made his journey, and I thought the book fit the energy of the episode tonight. So the book of the episode is Be Here Now by Ram Dass. If you want to listen to the podcast, be sure to follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you want to watch the podcast, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@thesamdeverpodcast. Here's my conversation with Seth. Seth Infinity Monk, welcome to the Sam Dever Podcast.
Thank you.
Yes, we're here. We're talking about eclipses before we start to roll here.
So for those of you at home, I was just at the full eclipse in Texas, and we were just saying what ancient peoples must have felt or thought when they saw just the sun go black and everything, night become day and everything just stand on its head. I guess it would be day becomes night.
Yeah, and describe your experience with that. Like you said, you could feel it.
I could feel it, yeah. So, first of all, it's like you don't really think about it, but it started to get cold, right? Because the sun was getting blocked out. So suddenly it starts to get cold, and it's this feeling that you're in this big shadow, which you are. But there's something, it's like ominous, is really this feeling of almost like dread and fear, because just our biology is just, what the heck is going on? It's just so startling.
Yeah.
And then there was this awe. And we were in a fields at that point with like 500 people or something. The festival had 30,000, but I think just where we were. And it was a combination of people just screaming, and people were crying, and people were like making like orgasmic, noises, like just their bodies were just reacting to this thing. And it was just so surreal. It's just so surreal where, the sun is such a stable thing. It's just
right.
It's that's the one thing that's always just kind of there. It's like the earth and the sky, and to have that just not be there, to have that place where there's usually a sun just be this white ring that's kind of glowing, and everything's just black, and you can kind of see the planets, but it's the middle of the day. It was just so surreal. And then I think my favorite moment was the moment that the eclipse began to pass, and suddenly just this ray of light, like a beam of light, just shot from the corner, and everyone just screamed in joy together, like the returning of the light, and then from there, kind of just like slowly transitioned. But just that moment where it went from dark to just like this light just shot through.
Whoa.
It was just, that's just burned into my memory.
How long did the actual, the covering of the sun last?
The full ring was 4 minutes, but
oh wow!
So we were in darkness for 4 minutes.
That's a lot longer than what I thought.
It was a while. It was long enough to have the whole experience, and then pick up my phone and do a thing, and then look at it again, and then talk to everybody about how crazy that thing was. But yeah, and then the lead up to that, then there was also a lead up to that of whatever, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes or something. And so.
Was there ever a moment of anxiety, especially after the 3-minute mark? Okay, it can go back now.
No, it was one of those things. I was, I was already missing it, because I just knew how temporary it was going to. It's like when you look at a rainbow, you're just in such appreciation and awe of it. And there's that part of you that's already just ready for the moment where it's not going to be there anymore. So just really knowing how temporary it was, I think adds to the magic of it too, and adds to the presence and the appreciation, because you're just there. There's nothing to do but just be there with it, which is a very kind of Buddhist kind of
I was gonna leading us right in. Yeah,
segue.
You, Eric, and
we call that a segue in the biz.
Yeah, you, Eric, and I met at an event in Venice, and Eric and I remember talking like the second you told us like your backstory, like, oh yeah, I used to be a Buddhist monk for years, and then like we got split up in to other places. I'm like, did he just say?
It's like a drive-by.
Yeah, we were really excited to meet you. I've never met a monk or anything like that before. So it was just like, I don't know, thrilling, I guess. Just be like, oh, what's he all about? What's his energy like? And just kind of just watching you was just really interesting. Yeah. You could just tell you were calm, peaceful. So it was really nice. And we bonded over the salad pizza.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shout out to Abbott Kinney Pizza.
Here in LA, go to Abbott Kinney Salad Pizza. Abbott Kinney Pizza.
Very good.
Best pizza in LA. Okay.
Well, now I have to try. Well, there's two things now. One, now I didn't care about the eclipse till like you just described this experience. I'm like, oh man, maybe I really did miss out on this.
Yeah, I think everybody needs to experience that.
And then the pizza, like because Eric was telling me about.
Well, that
this
you can
pizza.
get easily.
Yeah.
That's once more reasonable.
Just once.
Well, and when the second you told me, you know, and I can't wait to get into your backstory here, you know, because I like to read my fair share of spiritual books. Ram Dass and Anthony DeMello and just countless others have been pivotal in my journey. And that's why I'm really excited to talk to you, because there is this fantasy, if you want to call it that, of like leaving everything behind, all of it's meaningless, and just going to this monastery, going to these places in India or wherever it is, and truly finding yourself there. So I think just if you're willing, it'd be proper just to get your backstory of that journey.
Sure. While I was a monk, you know, the most common question, the most asked question was, why did you become a monk? And I had eventually this kind of prepackaged answer just because I was asked the same question so much and it was the easiest kind of thing. One day I sat down with a notebook and I was like, you know, I'm getting bored of saying the same thing. What else could I say? And I wrote, I think it was like 8 different versions of my life, 8 different life stories that culminated with me becoming a monk. And each one of them was true. They were all accurate. And it just depends on which thread you want to follow. If you look at a flower is water and it's sunlight and it's earth and it's space and it's a seed. You could deconstruct that flower into these elements, and any one of them, if you chose, could be the origin of that flower. You could talk about a flower as it was a cloud, or it used to be the sun, or it was the earth, or it was the mother flower. So part of Buddhism, it's this thing called non-self, or Thich Nhat Hanh calls it interbeing. And it's, if you look deeply into anything, you can see that everything is kind of made up of everything else. It's made up of the things around it, if you will. So we're the same way. The spit in your mouth is rain. It's the same as the stuff in the oceans. The material of your body, it's all the food you've eaten, which actually is sunlight that's been processed by plants and then animals. Even the language we're using was taught to us, and the thoughts in my head as I speak them out then go into your ears and become thoughts in your head. And even our thinking process is connected. And as I breathe, you're breathing in the air that I just breathed out, and we're having a gas exchange. Something that used to be me is now the space, and then it becomes you. And where do I begin and you end, so to say? And, you know, when we get deeper into looking at things in Zen Buddhism, I was a Vietnamese Zen monk. There's a saying, and it's that the universe is in a grain of rice. And it's because if you look deeply enough at that grain of rice, you can see the universe that birthed that grain of rice, that rice arose from. So the version of my life story that I'll tell, I guess now, it's that as a young child, I had a lot of experiences that I would call paranormal, synchronicities, psychic things, just experiences that, you know, showed me that there's something else going on behind the scenes. That it's as if there's this world that we're all living and interacting with, but there's other invisible things that are also influencing all of this. And nobody was talking about that. No one around me knew what that was. Didn't learn about it in school.
What age are we talking? Like when you're not recognizing
I'm
this
talking
stuff?
like 7,
Okay.
5, 7
okay.
onwards, and kind of peaked around like middle school, high school, and so that's one of the threads, right? So if this is the flower, this is me talking about the earth element, right? It's just that I had all these experiences that set me on this trajectory of just wanting to know what's out there. I'm also by nature very curious and adventurous. Like I wanted to be an archaeologist. Like the Indiana Jones movies, it's like I wanted to explore and dig in the depths and find treasures and bring them up and, show them, share them with others, right? And on a more human level, my father, he was a Vietnam War veteran, and he brought a lot of the war trauma home. So my house was not always a safe space emotionally. And because of that, I felt that I wasn't worthy, or I wasn't lovable, or I didn't deserve to set boundaries or to respect myself. So my childhood, it was kind of plagued with that sort of thing, that I was kind of like an outsider in a lot of my school days, I guess, like very like one or two friends maybe at times. So I had both of these things playing on me, right? That I had this feeling of being an outsider, and I'm experiencing all of these things that nobody is talking about or knows about. And I'm kind of in this pain that I don't know what to do with. And so that kind of like trifecta, I guess, really sent me on a path of doing my own research and, trying to understand things. I actually went to university for physics. That was my first move, because I was like, well, like, let me try to understand how the world works. And while I was in college, my freshman year, I actually tried psychedelics for the first time, mushrooms. And when I was on that experience, I just had breakthrough after breakthrough after breakthrough. So it's kind of shown that when you're on psilocybin, it activates different connections in your brain, and parts of your brain get to communicate that otherwise wouldn't, kind of like the same way that the mycelium network works underground. And I just started seeing things clearly for the first time, and I saw myself clearly for the first time. And at the end of that experience, I met with a friend who took me to the art lab where she was doing sculpture. And I was like, you get to play with clay for school, And I was like, I'm sitting in math class and you're here getting to actually touch things and work with your environment. I was like, this is, so I decided then and there that I wanted to switch and become an art major. And as that transition was happening, I also randomly met a monk. That a monk came to my school. And I remember seeing like a flyer for this monk, and I was like, oh, that's cool. And, I wasn't into Buddhism at all. I didn't know anything about it. But I went to this talk, and it was him in the auditorium in our university, at University of Hartford in Connecticut. And I brought this big, I forget what it is, like A3, I think it is, just giant notepad of paper that I had for my drawing class. And I remember sitting in the audience and listening to him talk, and I just started taking notes. And by the end of the talk, I had this huge piece of paper just filled with notes, plus even like a drawing of him, like a sketch, And I had this feeling, and it was like this feeling of coming home. And I know that I've heard that almost like very cliche used in a lot of, but that was the feeling. It was this moment where it was so clear to me that, oh, what I'm looking for, it's not art, and it's not physics, and it's not philosophy, it's spirituality. And I didn't know that spirituality was a thing. I grew up Jewish, and it's, there's traditions and customs and structured religious, but I never connected to something that I would call spirituality, which for me it's more focused on the experiential growth and connection versus following any set of principles or rules or teachings per se. And after that, I, he was giving a workshop, and I went to the workshop, and just strange things happened. Like I saw his aura, which is not something that I see usually, but he was talking and I just saw this blue light emanating from him. And I was like, I see this blue light. And his translator, like, oh, and he's like, oh, like you have a very powerful gift, and it was this whole thing. But I started practicing with him when he came back he came back every 3 months. And so I'd practice with him when he came back. And then over time, that just kind of took over. That I was meditating. I remember in college, friends calling me to come out to the bar with them. And I'd say, no, I'm meditating. And they'd laugh and be like, all right, yeah, come on. All right, so we'll see you soon. And I was like, no, I'm actually going to sit at home and meditate. And just my path just started diverging, or maybe redirecting. And when I graduated college, this monk, he said, yeah, you can come to my monastery if you want. And first I said no. I was like, I want to go to California. And he just kind of looked at me and he's like, okay, go.
He already knew. He's like,
and I went to California, to San Francisco, and I was miserable. And I drove back across. I drove from San Francisco to Boston, 72 hours by myself, just shot across the country, and then flew to Germany, which is where his monastery was. And I said to my mom, I'll be back in 2 weeks. And I stayed there for 8 years.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
So it was a gradual thing throughout your college years. It's not like you met the monk and you immediately, it was a multi-year process to get to that point.
Yeah. I mean, there was fits and spurts, as it were. I mean, definitely, like when I took the mushrooms that one time, and then his talk, and then some of the seminars I went to, it definitely propelled me in that direction. But I didn't know that I wanted to be a monk. Honestly, I lived at the monastery for a year, and it took me maybe like 8 months of living there to decide that I wanted to ordain and become a monk. And it was only because that just made sense. Like if you're living in a monastery and there's monks and there's nuns and you're going to be living there and practicing, it was just like the next thing to do. So it was never this feeling of, like I want to, there was not like this moment where I just knew I want to be a monk. It kind of just was convenient to become a monk while I was there. Since I was focusing on my spiritual path and doing the things that they were doing, it just made sense. It was just the way to be in that community eventually.
And maybe for myself and the audience's purposes, what is a monk?
What is a monk?
Yeah, because I think it's a term that we all throw around, but if someone were to describe it, someone who meditates, myself included, like what?
Sure. Well, there's different sorts of monks, right? There's like Christian monks, and there's Buddhist monks, Hindu monks. So a Buddhist monk is somebody who, so the Buddha is a historical figure. He's from India 2,500 years ago, and he was a prince in India. And he looked around him and looked at the world around him, and he kind of had that moment where he said, according to the story, right, that, what is it going to do if I become a king and I have all this money and all this stuff, but we're all going to get old, get sick, we're going to die. Like there's important pressing issues here and what it means to be a human. And I can't go and become a king if I don't know what these answers are. So he cut off his hair, he gave away his royal clothes, and he went and, on this journey to discover these answers that he was looking for. And, once he found these answers under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya and reached enlightenment, as we call it, which, I can get into, and there's a lot of technicalities of what that actually means, enlightenment. But he then, put forth a path of practice and a lifestyle and a structure that one could follow if one wanted to kind of streamline their spiritual growth. It's like a banana is held within a banana peel, and the banana ripens in the peel. And then when that peel is no longer needed, you discard the peel and eat the banana, right? So the monk is the peel. It's the container that facilitates a process of spiritual growth. Yeah, whether it's a Christian monk or a Buddhist monk or Hindu monk, it's a container that is tweaked in a specific way to bring you. It's kind of like going to school, right? You go to med school to be a doctor, and that's a container that's geared towards you getting to a certain place that you can be a doctor, you can do the thing. So being a monk, it's similarly, it's a container to streamline a process of growth and learning. A Buddhist monk specifically, it's about shaving the head, wearing robes the color of the earth, is what they say. And then we have a series of rules that we follow, training rules. There's kind of like the main baseline rules, which is like no lying and no killing and no stealing, no sexual intercourse, misconducts, anything. Generally, monks, you can't even be like alone in a room with a woman, sort of thing. And then it's also no drugs, alcohol, intoxicants. So that's kind of like these main precepts, we call them. And then built on top of that, it's then like no handling money, and that you can't eat past noontime. And when you're fully ordained, there's like 150 rules to, and it's because back in ancient India, there were these guys walking around, these monks, and they were people from different educations, different backgrounds. They needed some sort of cohesive thing. When you get to the spirit of the rules, they're all really about maintaining harmony and balance within yourself and in your surroundings. So that's like the spirit of the rules, is how to live in a way that's harmless to yourself and to others, and helpful even. For instance, the precept of refraining from taking life, no killing. By focusing on that, when I get bit by a mosquito, it would be like, I can't kill it, so I'd have to start to brush it off and blow it off instead of trying to swat it, right? So now I'm trying to protect this life. But then it would get to the point where it's like you see an ant walking in the hallway, and you pick it up and you bring it outside because now you want to save it. So it's creating that awareness of refraining from killing actually starts to generate a reverence and a protectiveness for life. By focusing on not lying, not speaking untruths, you actually start to be very conscious of the words you use, the effects that those words are going to have, when to be silent, and how to utilize our speech in a way that's helpful and conducive to whatever the thing is, to growth, to healing, to love, to connection. By not having sex and making that a thing, it really starts to cultivate a connection to other people from the heart. And you're not trying to get anything from people. You're not trying to misuse or manipulate or shift or present yourself. It all kind of starts to just dissipate. And so by focusing on all of these training rules, it starts to cultivate almost like the positive opposite, as it were, of protecting and loving and giving and honoring. And it creates a lot of safety. It's like, can you imagine if everybody in this world right now is walking around and you knew that they were all observing the precepts of not killing, not stealing, not lying, like not having any like sexual misconduct, and not even not having sex, but at least like, having consensual sex, and and not taking any drugs or intoxicants. You could walk down the darkest alley on any night, anywhere in the world, and feel completely safe. How beautiful, how incredible would it be if we lived in a world where everyone was safe, creating a safe space for everyone else to be. And that's such a gift to be able to give to the world. This harmlessness, this safety. And it was kind of like an honor. And even though I'm not a monk anymore, I carry that with me. I have a girlfriend, so, and I have money now because I'm working. But I still like not killing anything, not lying, not stealing, and as tempting as it is, I go to Whole Foods and it's like a piece of pizza. I was like, I could just put 2 pieces of pizza in that box and I go to self-checkout and they'd never know. But it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. It's not worth it to deviate from that and to corrupt that energy, because it's so beautiful to be able to give that high integrity love and safety and presence to the world.
There's about 1,000 things that we could pick out of that. That was incredible. Thank you for that. I love what you said about the banana peel. How, and I'm really aligning with what you, because you are exactly correct. Like how much of the world, especially in our society now, there's some hidden motive. It's not even, I wouldn't even call it malicious with most people, but the way our society's set up, hustle, 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 grind, 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 trying to get to the top, make as much money as possible. It is very interesting. Like, what if no one had that intentions, not those intentions to sleep with this person, not this intention to, I'm going to make a bunch of money doing this. Like, just coming from that place of purity. And as you're describing that, that's what it's like, wow. It's like, it really took me through a journey of how intense we've made everyday society, especially at a big city like Los Angeles, and I'm sure New York and places like that. I don't think we realize how heavy it really is. And as you're describing what you described, it's like you're just removing all of that.
Yeah, I spent a period of time living at a Thai forest monastery in Australia, of all places, and this is near Perth, and this was kind of like outbacky, deserty,
You had to have saw some crazy stuff out there.
Yeah. But what was interesting for me was the animals, the kangaroos specifically, because these monks had been living and practicing there for 20 years with this harmlessness and this peacefulness, the kangaroos would just come up to you. Wild animals would just feel the field of energy. Parrots would just come. Animals were just coming up to us because they just felt safe. You go other places in Australia and everything runs away from you. But there, everything was coming towards you. Like I have pictures of me just petting wild kangaroos because monks had just been living there peacefully for so long that even the animals start to get entrained with that. They start to get reprogrammed that, oh, like these people are actually safe. And that's just such a testament to it, right? Just wild animals are just feeling affectionate and safe towards the monks just because the monks are loving and respecting them and themselves. It's just imagine if we're all doing that.
It's a confirmation of just how real energy is. The energy you put out. And what led you to Australia? How did you go from where you were at?
Yeah, there's this monk, Achan Brahm. He's this incredible, he was a theoretical physicist in Cambridge and then went to the Peace Corps of Thailand and met these monks and just wanted to give it a shot. And he is now one of the, foremost meditation masters in the world. When he's in Singapore and he gives talks in like a stadium, and he told a story that Lady Gaga was there the weekend before and he sold more tickets than Lady Gaga did to the stadium. Like he sold out the stadium, Whoa. Super loving, humorous. He has tons of talks on YouTube and stuff. But we hosted him at our monastery in Germany. And then when I left the monastery, he offered me a space there. So I went and practiced there for 3 months and then had a kind of defining moment where my meditation was getting incredibly strong. And under his guidance, he just kind of gave me the secrets, the meditation hack that I was needing. And, I was just having these amazing experiences. I'd be sitting for 3 hours at a time, just in bliss. And I'd come out of it and I just felt like I was floating. I'd look at a clock and the minutes were ticking like seconds, like just being in this spaciousness. 3 months of mostly silence, just alone in my own hut, And I just had this moment where I felt myself just getting more and more peaceful, more and more still, more and more just focused onto that path. And I looked out into the horizon and I could see all these little lights coming on from Perth, from all of these homes. And I just had this moment where I thought about all the people in their homes and what they must be going through. You know, how many of those homes had people that were depressed? How many of those people were homes that were fighting? How many children were being abused in those homes? Just the suffering and the troubles of the world. And I kind of like looked back at my walking path and this just saw myself just walking into this like light, like into like light, into infinity, into this peace. And I couldn't do it. You know, it's, what good does that do? Like, great, Seth is happy. Good for Seth. But if the world is still suffering, what does it matter if I'm happy? And I just felt that in that moment, something just shifted. And I knew that I had to come back. I had to come back to do what I'm supposed to do here in this life. It's not just to sit peacefully in a cave, which I did in India for a while, you know. It was really to be amongst the people, to be here to share and to support and to love everyone. And it's been a challenge, you know, especially having to reintegrate into this world and having to figure out like money, like finances, something I'm still struggling with, you know, because I just came from a life of service. I just want to show up and give and love and help people. And, you know, I didn't touch money for 10 years. I didn't need to. And then suddenly, you know, I have to figure out these ways to support myself while doing these, like suddenly I'm learning about Instagram stories and reels to, you know, it's just, it's having to learn all these things and go in all these directions to like sell myself to then do. And it's like, God, like, I don't want to, it's like, can I, you know what I mean? It's like, can I just do the thing? Can I just help people and can the rest of it just be taken care of somehow? Like what, like, I don't, you know?
I was struggling with TikTok. I was telling Eric I was struggling for 2 hours figuring out how to do a TikTok green screen today.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel you. Yes.
Yeah.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah. Yeah. So
before you made that decision to reintegrate, did the thoughts of temptation to come back ever kind of pop in your head? Was that something you had to fight against, or was it really, were you pretty chill not having those thoughts, or was it always, you know, a temptation there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like the words temptation and fighting, it for me, it has like these like Christian like overtones almost. You know,
sure, I mean that's all I know.
Yeah,
I vocabulary's poor.
Yeah, it was kind of like, of course, I mean, everyone has those moments. You know, how many married couples have those moments? How many times where you're at your job, where you're like, do I really want to be here? I mean, so it's normal and natural to question things and to have those moments of, yeah, like doubt or questioning. I mean, always. And also, you know, I was in the monastery from when I was 23 to when I was 30. And like to not be having sex during that time, to not be like partying and going and drinking beer, and not like all the things that a kid that age would be doing. There were for sure moments where I felt like, you know, I'm sitting in my room meditating and I'll hear some like music coming in the distance from outside somewhere, you know, or I'll hear people laughing, you know, just these moments where, yeah, it's just like, what am I doing? It's almost like I'm on this permanent timeout in my bedroom when everyone's playing outside, kind of like as a kid feeling, you know? But then there was all these other times where, I mean, people would just come up to me with tears in their eyes, just telling me how I changed their life. And, you know, and I traveled the world, and when you also really get deep into meditation and you start healing yourself, um, it's kind of indescribable how reality shifts. We have almost these like I call them perceptual films. It's like the terminology that I kind of invented, but it's kind of like how to even explain this. It's like a blind spot that you have, or let's say that if you're as a child, your parents always were telling you, to strive more and to do better and to achieve, and and that you then form something around achieving, being associated with love and worthiness. And if you didn't achieve or if you failed, then you're unworthy and you're unlovable. So then you spend your life striving, trying to attain something. And then one day you kind of just look at yourself. I think people call this like a midlife crisis, where you suddenly look at yourself and like, what am I doing? Why am I chasing these cars and these positions and these things? What is there's no substance there. I've been programmed since I was a kid to achieve because I thought that's what love is and that's what I'm supposed to do. But I'm realizing now that's actually not bringing me happiness. And I don't care if I'm achieving anything. Achievement is not what life is about. I want to be happy, and suddenly just this thing, like this film, peels off and suddenly you're seeing things more clearly, and being in the monastery for 8 years, I mean, it was just,
Yeah.
It's like you're wearing a pair of sunglasses and just these layers are getting pulled off. And each time you're like, oh, this is what clarity is. Now I see clearly. And then like a week later, it's like, oh my God, no, like this, and it just keeps going, you just it keeps getting deeper and deeper. And it starts freeing up all this space. It's I realized when I was on like a meditation retreat and all these situations from my past started popping up in my mind. I use the simile. It's like if you were holding tennis balls underwater and then you kind of like start to loosen your grip and the tennis balls, whoop, and they start popping up to the surface. It's like when you meditate, all the things that you've been like holding back, they start coming up to be looked at, to be heard, to be integrated, to be processed. And, I did at one point a 3-month silent retreat in my room. And when I was doing these full length Tibetan bows where I had like a plank of wood that I'd slide down this plank of wood and then stand up. And they're called prostrations. You do these things. And I did 100,000 of them. This was like what my retreat was kind of consisted of. And I fasted for 2 weeks during that time too. And it's just all this stuff, lots of crazy experiences. But I just was watching all of these things coming up that I hadn't dealt with, that I hadn't processed. There was times where I would be doing these prostrations and I would remember something my dad did, he'd stop the car for me to get out and I was too slow and there'd be a car coming behind us and he'd start yelling at me that there's a car behind us. Why, and I'm like, why is the person in that car more important than me? And I was doing these prostrations and I remember and I decided just to start facing everything. And I imagined my father standing in front of me and I was prostrating to him and I just got angry, and I started talking out loud, and I was just like, why do you care about them, not me? What about me? Like, I want you to care about me. Like, I want to be loved. Don't you love me? And then I just started, crying. And then I was like, oh, I'm not angry at my dad. I just wanted to be loved. I wanted to receive love and I got yelled at, and then another memory would come up and then I'd have to work with that one and process it until it found its resolution. And then the next thing would come up. And it was just this process of just digging up all of these things and having to resolve them one after the other. But through that process, I just became lighter and lighter and happier and more spacious. And then also when I would talk to other people and they would tell me that they're angry at their dad, I'd be like, oh, it could be that you actually just really want to feel love, and suddenly through my own healing process, I was able to support other people, right? I didn't get a PhD. I didn't, not a psychiatrist or psychologist or whatever. But the students that came to our monastery, we were teaching the therapists, we were teaching the psychiatrists and psychologists and the social workers. They were the ones coming to learn from us because we were just in it. We were sitting there with our feelings and facing things. And my teacher was, he had a light and a dark side, as they say, but he was profoundly gifted, psychic, could just see exactly what was going on with you and just put his finger on it, and break the thing open. So for me, being a monk, it was a lot of different things. I woke up every morning at 5 a.m. and meditated, and we chanted, and then we did breakfast and tended to the monastery, whatever that meant, whether there was a retreat or whether we just had to clean or do, whatever, and lived in this community. But what that whole journey was for me, it was just this process of growth as a person, of really dealing with my past, dealing with my life, excavating things, finding resolution, freeing up energy. And through that process of healing myself, I learned all of these tools that now I bring to the table where I support other people. And kind of like the precepts, like not killing turns into wanting to save and protect and love life. By healing myself, just naturally arose this path, this journey to help others, to serve others. I know what it's like to feel alone. I know what it's like to feel desperate. I know what it's like to feel hopeless. And I don't want anyone else to have to feel those things unnecessarily. I've learned the value in feeling our feelings, and there's no way around it. But also, we can get stuck and boxed in by our pain. There's a lot of people living in misery in this world right now. Most of our population is medicated. Most of the world, the first world countries, the food we eat is toxic. The media that we receive, the apps that we're glued to are constructed by people who have the most amount of money and the most research into how to hijack our focus. The world we live in is geared against us, socially speaking. When you go out in nature and you go on a hike, you go on a walk, the world is as it's been. It's beautiful. It's nice. You go out of the matrix, as it were. You just go out into nature as it is, and everything's great, and you reconnect real fast. I try to go hiking every week just to get out and just to be in the natural world, which we are made of. We are nature. So that's why when we go to nature, we find balance. But the world that we live in currently, it's constructed. It's artificial. We're in these boxes. We have these lights. We have things that our biology is still not used to. And a lot of the powers that be around us don't necessarily have our best interests in mind. They have their own best interests in mind. So we're kind of swimming upstream. And the average person is not doing great. There's a huge epidemic of depression, of anxiety, of people that can't sleep, of people that are on different substances, medicated, self-harm, you name it, mental and emotional pain of epic proportions all over this world. And when people look for help, they're often given, when I came back from the monastery, I'm from Boston. I was brought into the schools, and they asked me to help because there was an opiate, epidemic. And so I was working with the kids, and they were giving me all of like the bad kids to work with that are not doing great in school because they're the troubled ones. But then MIT reached out to me and asked me to join their wellness program because the kids at MIT were starting to commit suicide. And I was like, all right, so, the high school is telling me it's the kids that are getting C's that are the problem, but now I'm at MIT and it's actually the kids that were getting A's that are struggling. And then I just had one of those moments where it was just like, it's everybody. It's not these kids or these kids, it's everybody is going through it. And then all the teachers, and it was just so prevalent everywhere that, it's kind of like a meditation object for me at the moment. One of the things I came to was just the way that I live my life simply has to be a way that spreads love and goodness and support to others. And I teach a couple classes in LA, and I do one-on-one like virtual sessions with people, and I do some Facebook Lives, and I have 200 talks on Spotify for people. But one of the things that I really struggle with is impact. How to create a bigger impact, how to spread and give the information that's needed. If you go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a doctor, they're going to give you chemicals, they'll give you medications. When I was in the schools, they were giving these kids medications, and I would talk to the kids and I'm like, did they tell you to exercise first? Did they ask you about your diet? Did they ask you about your home life? Why are we so quick to give a kid a thing to alter their brain chemistry without actually looking at the totality of their organism to see, well, what could actually be shifted to become healthier, right? It's because it's an industry. It's the pharmaceutical industry, right? So a lot of the places that we turn to for help are these industries profiting off of us. And an industry wants to keep making profits. So if you were to actually get better, then they're not making profits anymore. So if just from a purely business standpoint, it's not in their best interests for you to get better, and the things that are actually the best for us are all free. The sunlight, the air, the water, stretching, doing yoga, meditating. I'm currently fasting, all of the things that actually could benefit us the most, they're all free. They're all things you can just do. You can just do by yourself and receive what you need, hugs, free hugs,
It's the simplest things that make the greatest impact.
Yeah.
And it seems like everyone willing to spend however much money on the quick fix or the magic this, the magic that. But like you just said, good diet, sleep, fasting. I'm curious, what type of fasting do you currently do?
Yeah. So I'm currently doing a water fast. So I just started doing this by myself, and I told other people, and I now lead on WhatsApp, like a free fasting group that we do the first 3 days of every month, and then the 15th of every month.
72 hours?
On the 15th, it's just a 24-hour fast. Okay. Yeah. And then the first 3 days of each month. Yeah. And then I actually just learned about something, which is a grape fast.
Grape fast?
Grapes. Yeah. There's a book called The Grape Cure. And apparently you can just eat grapes for like up to a month. And it's amazing for your system. And, I'm just getting into it, so I don't want to speak. I try not to speak on things that I don't have.
Right.
I'm not an authority on this, and I'm sure there's evidence against it, whatever. But I recently spoke to somebody who did this, and they said it was incredible. And I've been like researching it a bit, and I'm trying it out. So, in the fridge right now, we have like a bag of grapes. We spent like $70 on grapes. So
that's why there were no grapes at the grocery store.
That's why there's no grapes. Yeah. So organic grapes. So
organic grapes are expensive.
Very expensive. Yeah. And they're out of season right now. But, so just trying to do things to help, help the system detox and help the system like release a lot of what it's carrying. And what I say to my fasting group is that, especially the ones we're doing, which are just 1 or 3 days, it's actually more of a mental and emotional process. That we are doing a physical process by just water fasting. But what's coming up is all of these feelings, the parts of us that feel uncomfortable, that are used to just grabbing food and taking whatever we want whenever we want it to soothe ourselves. And to deny yourself, and this is something from the monastery that I practiced a lot, is to deny yourself the thing that you want when you want it. We're like children again. The tantrums come up, you get grumpy, you get tired, you get irritable, you have to start facing things. And then all of the things in your life that aren't going well for you, then those start to rub you even harder, right? And you start to get even more irritated by them. And so it creates this beautiful opportunity to kind of really, purge out some of that stuff, and to really have to confront, and same thing with being a monk. There's all of the, thou shalt nots, the things not to do.
Right.
What that really also forces you to do is you have to confront yourself and face yourself. Why did I want to lie? Why did I want to steal? Why, you have to face wanting to have sex, but not being able to, wanting to drink, but not being able to, wanting to just take whatever you want whenever you want it and not being able to, wanting to eat whenever you want and not being able to. And it's kind of like training an animal. It's like horse trainers, they talk about this, like a wild horse. It has to eventually learn that it can be safe to not need to do whatever it wants to whenever it wants to do it. We train animals too. To realize that you need to tame yourself, and to understand that level of discipline, it actually brings security to the self. It creates stability. We think that freedom is getting whatever I want whenever I want it. Have our lives become easier and more calm since we got a phone that can get us whatever we want whenever we want it? When I used to have a TV that had 500 channels, was it easier to get whatever I wanted? No. It created like endless scrolling, endless channel flipping. It created another kind of hell. You go to the supermarket and there's 30 kinds of ketchup. Did your life get easier? Because it's like it becomes more complicated. It's the opposite. So, yeah, anyway.
This is awesome, because I'm like, could talk about that.
Sure.
One thing I do want to bring up, and thank you for all this. This is wonderful. The tennis ball analogy.
Sure.
I think what you described there is, in my opinion, like one of the cruxes that could help humanity the most. Like people facing and dealing in a healthy way those things, and instead we live in a society where you can go drink, you can go do drugs, you can eat bad food, you can just numb yourself with so many different things. And I tell people it's not just drugs and alcohol, it's fast food, it's video games. You can totally just social media. You can, and I'm guilty of it too. Like I'm stressing. Oh, let me just scroll for a little bit. It'll all go away. But no, nothing's gone away. You've just hasn't chosen to deal with it. And another thing you just said reminded me, I'm trying more and more to practice when you do feel anxiety, when you do feel frustrated with something, actually taking that moment to pause and be like, oh, okay, I'm feeling frustrated right now. Why is that? And I've felt that just taking that moment to recognize and at least call it out helps. May not wipe it out completely, but just being aware, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. That awareness. So many of us, we're not even aware. We're just in constant fight or flight mode. And just when you're talking about the tennis balls, that's what it reminds me of, is like having, so when you're in a monastery, you don't have any of those things to escape to.
Yeah, well, we do put up a lot of boundaries. So the Buddha gave a simile, and it was like, if there's like a gopher underground in the mound and there's 6 different holes and the gopher can pop in and out of any of the holes, he said the way to catch the gopher is to block off all of the holes except for one. So that's the one it has to go up in, and then you can grab it, and by blocking off all of these escape routes as a monk, you're forcing the mind to have to go through the path that you're telling it to go through, that it has to come up in meditation. It has to be faced right here. There's no side routes for it to take. And so that's part of that streamlining of the process, is that you're forcing yourself to face things, which is also quite difficult, obviously. You can also avoid in a million different ways. Part of why I left the monastery too is because I saw that there were monks and nuns, women too, monks and nuns, but that were monks because that was their way of avoiding that by just living in a thing and not having to take, they weren't taking any responsibility for their lives, for their happiness, for the world, that it became this comfortable, easy thing, like a cushy, tenured position that they could just be in and be treated like a king because they're wearing a robe and people were respecting them. And it was sad, it was kind of gross. And it was like, it, it, it really just showed me that it doesn't matter. You could be in any form and you could be thriving and growing and learning and progressing, or you could be, eroding away, kind of like molding. I would say I felt like some monks were like molding, that they were just, and so you could also sit in meditation and, you could just be really sleepy the whole time. That's one way to escape. You could be lost in fantasies and thoughts. There's a lot of ways to still try to escape, even when it's just you and the mind, even when you've blocked off all the entrances except that one of the mind. You'll still try to escape in a million ways until eventually the mind realizes that it is safe, that this moment is safe and it is enough. And it's like breaking through this crust of like resistance that we have to just being here. There's that expression, actually I forget it now, but it's something like all of man's problems can be, discovered by his inability to sit alone in an empty room. And once we sit alone in an empty room long enough, something breaks. And it's that resistance. It's that feeling that like this panic in the body, like I need to do something. I need to get out of this. I need, and once we break through that, there's just this beautiful peace. And there's this realization that this is enough. This moment is enough. This breath is enough. This body is enough, that I don't need anything, and there's nothing to worry about or be afraid of. And it's crazy how programmed that is into our nervous systems, that we need something, that this moment is dangerous somehow, that I just need to grab a phone or a remote or a beer or a butt or something, it's just, and to go through that process and to watch that, resistance. Anyone who's been on like a meditation retreat can attest to that there's this couple-day process where everything's just freaking out because you're not letting yourself get away with anything anymore. You're not giving yourself all the traditional distractions. But once you break through that, it's like, gosh, like just to be able to sit for hours and just smile, and it's cooling. It's like this refreshing, cooling feeling of contentment, of enoughness, and again, free. It's right here. It's my teacher, one of my teachers, Ajahn Brahm, the one I was mentioning, he, again, he was this theoretical physicist. And he said, I believe he said this was either Heisinger or John Nash, that that said, you're not an expert in your field until you can explain it to the girl behind the bar. And, just what it means by that is you don't really know what you're talking about unless you can explain it to somebody who has no fucking idea what you're talking about. And so he said, so I thought about enlightenment in those terms, and I thought of a way to talk about enlightenment that everyone can understand. And he said, and it's in the form of a story. And it's called The Wishing Game. So here's the story of The Wishing Game. He said that there's 5 children that were sitting around, and they decided to play a game called The Wishing Game. And the game was who could come up with the best wish. So the first child went, this boy, and he's like, I wish for the new Xbox with all the games. And all the kids were like, ooh, yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. And then the next kid went, this girl, and she was like, I wish for the whole video game store That way I can play all of the games for all the systems, whatever comes out, and then I could play games forever. And all the kids were like, wow, that was a good one. And then it was the third child, it's this boy, and he's like, I wish for $1 billion. I'd buy the whole mall. So I get the food court, I get the games. I would buy myself a college, give myself a degree. So I could just hang out and eat and play video games for the rest of my life, and I don't have to do anything ever again. Beat that. And all the kids are like, sheesh, that's a hard one. So then it was the fourth child, this girl, and she kind of thought, and she said, I would wish for 3 wishes. For my first wish, I would get $1 billion. For my second wish, I'll take them all. And for my third wish, I'll wish for 3 more wishes.
Yeah.
That way, I can go on wishing forever. Beat that. So now it's on the fifth child, so the last child. And he had to think of a wish that could beat getting an infinity of wishes fulfilled. And that child's name was the Buddha. And he said, I wish to be so content that I never have to wish for anything again. And he won the wishing game.
Mic drop.
Yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Because at the end of the day, we don't actually want any of the stuff that we want. At the end of the day, we want to feel contentment. We want to feel freedom from wanting. We don't want freedom from wants. Like, I have $1 million, $1 billion, I'm free of want. I have everything. No, we want to be free of wanting. To have peace in ourselves, to not need anything external to make ourselves feel better. We live in a world where we're chasing getting an infinity of wishes fulfilled instead of chasing the actual thing we want, which is that feeling of contentment and peace and wholeness. And that's what the monastery was about. That's the point.
What do you think that missing link is? Like, say if we were to obtain that, do you think it is some sort of almost like childlike need from like our inner child of like needing like this validation or something like that? Do you think that's kind of like, what's your best guess of like what it is actually that's stemming these knee-jerk reactions, or what would we need to heal, so to speak, in order to obtain something like that? Like what, like, I don't know if I'm asked if that makes any sense.
I mean, it's not one thing, it's not one thing. Some of it's childhood, some of it's biological, some of it's social programming, some of it's just not knowing. We just don't know. We don't know any better. Kind of what we were talking about is that space, taking that pause, taking a moment to see what's coming up in us and reflecting on it and seeing like, what is this? Where is this coming from? What does it want? Is this actually what I want? Is this actually moving me where I want to go or not? Is it working? When I left the monastery and I kind of looked out at the world, one of the things that stood out to me was it doesn't seem like people are really reflecting on, is my strategy working? Am I actually becoming happier or not? Am I becoming more peaceful? Are my actions moving me in this direction that I want to be moving in? And oftentimes the answer is no. Oftentimes we're doing the same thing that's giving us the same often painful results or numbing agent results, but we just don't know what else to do. We don't know how to get out of it. We don't have the available energy for it. We don't have the support systems. And it really, like, what is meditation? Meditation is just space. It's actually just creating space and letting space be there. And that's it. It's like just space, quiet, breath, thisness. And thoughts come and feelings come and reactions come. And, one of the teachers I met, this woman, Tenzin Palmo. She lived in a cave in the Himalayas for 12 years. She has a book called A Cave in the Snow. It's amazing. And one of the things she said is, she's like, we think we're the clouds, but we're actually the sky. We identify with the thoughts, with the feelings, with the stories, with the impulses. We identify with all of these mental objects, emotional objects coming up into our awareness. But we're not those things. If we were something, we'd be the awareness itself. We would be that space of awareness that's seeing those and hearing those. It was a revelation for me when I realized I didn't have to believe everything that I thought. That I was in meditation and I was like mad at my own thoughts. And I was like, stop thinking now. I want to meditate. And my mind goes, everybody wants kung fu fighting, like that. And I just threw my hands up in the air. I was like, this is ridiculous. And I just saw like I have no control. That the mind just is doing its own thing. It's like a hose that's just spraying in all directions. And it's crazy how much I would identify with my thoughts and even defend my thoughts. Right after that retreat ended, there was 3 guys that came up to me and they're like, what do you think the teacher's doing when he's not meditating? One's like, I bet he's meditating in his room. And the other one's like, I bet he's watching TV in his room. And I was like, you guys don't know what you're talking about. He's definitely, and I stopped and I just had that moment. I was like, I just spent this whole retreat watching how ridiculous my thoughts were, how unfounded my thoughts were, how my thoughts don't even represent me. And the very first opportunity I had to talk, I was about to take a thought, try to establish it, defend it, tell other people why their thoughts were wrong. And I just stopped. And I said, I have absolutely no idea.
I bet you felt great in that
what
moment.
He does.
That's
yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I still take that with me to this day, that I'll have thoughts, I'll be upset. I'll be with someone and I'll start judging them in my head. And I'll say it in my head to myself, I don't agree with that. I was like, no, that's not who I am. That's not what I actually think or feel. And that's not how I want to show up in this world. That one of the things the Buddha said, it's like as if a carpenter were to take a round peg with a hammer and hit it and pop out an old peg with like a new peg, like replacing a peg in a structure. And it's like that. It's like there'll be a thought and I'm like, that's not representative of me. I don't even agree with that. And I'll take another thought and put it there instead and be like, no, like this person's doing their best. And if I have a problem, like that's why do I care? Why would I ever judge anybody? What does that make me feel? What's my problem? And having to be accountable, that accountability, high level accountability with our own thoughts, with our own stories, with our own feelings, with our own behaviors, high level accountability, especially in the world. It's in the monastery, it was easier because everyone's holding similar frameworks and you could kind of coast a little more and you're still going in the right direction. Right. But in the world, man, it's like, this is the jungle. Like there's everything out here and you have to really be on top of yourself. Cause like I said, a lot of the things around us, they're working against us.
And that leads me to a question I had. I actually have 10 other questions.
Yeah.
But I'll go with the
line after you.
Well, we got 10 more hours. So.
Yeah. Let me just make sure. Okay. I'm curious what that first moment was like after years in being in this environment of the monastery and around other monks and what have you. What was it like those maybe first, month back, getting reestablished into the United States, or into society rather, where people don't practice these things?
Yeah. I was smart about how I did it. I actually left the monastery and I went to India. And I spent a year traveling through India. And then I went to Australia and did this retreat, went back to Boston where I'm from, spent a few months with my parents, then went back to India and then disrobed in India. and then spent 9 months in India, just traveling through the country as a lay person, as not a monk. And so I really gave myself just this swath of time to decompress and to find out who am I now, and in a place where there's just like a lot of movement and a lot of choices and there's nobody that I know, and it's just, so I really gave myself just that kind of like the caterpillar in its cocoon and it turns to goo, the imaginal cells, if you know what I'm talking about. That I let myself just kind of fall apart there and reorganize. And I like India because it's kind of this balance of people that are practicing and people that are all sorts of other things. And you can kind of find it all there. And there's a lot of people that, are, one of my kind of like seminal experiences around all of this was I went to Dharamsala where the Dalai Lama lives and started studying Tibetan there, and then became friends with these girls, and they invited me over to their apartment, which was in a monastery. And they said, "Oh, the Dalai Lama's oracle used to live here." I was like, "The oracle?" They're like, "Yeah, he like channels these like messages for the Dalai Lama, and it's like this like ritual shamanic thing." I was like, "Cool." And they're like, "Yeah. Do you want a session with him?" I was like, "Of course I do.
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about? Please, And they're like, "Okay, yeah." And, and they made an appointment with him. She like had him on her phone, and like, cause I guess he lived like, upstairs or whatever. So, they had an appointment. So I was like, cool, so I came back like a week later and they're all excited for me. And I went and said hi to them. They're like, "Oh, okay. Like, he's waiting." So I, go out and like kind of went up like around the back of the monastery and up these stairs and got to like the kind of the roof, and there was this like room on the roof. And I, knock and I hear, "Oh, come in." And I kind of go in and like, in reverent bow position, and I come in and then and I'm expecting like the monk with all the thing, and there's just this guy, this Tibetan man in this like buttoned up shirt and glasses. And I was like, "Oh, hello, Oracle." And he's like, "Oh, I'm not the Oracle," And I was like, "Oh, okay." And he's like, "Yeah, sit." And I sat, and then we chatted a little bit. And he's like, "Yeah, it's like, what are the questions?" I was like, "So," and he's like, "Yeah, I'll take your questions and I'll ask the Oracle for you." I was like, "Oh, okay, thank you." So I asked him the questions and I was like, "Okay, thank you." And he kind of looked like a doctor almost, I was like, "Cool." And I went downstairs to the girls and like, "How was it?" And I was like, "Oh, the Oracle wasn't there." I talked to his assistant and they're like, "Oh, really? He wasn't there?" He said it. And I was like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Oh, that's too bad." And she's like, "Well, I had a great time. You want to see?" "Sure." And she like showed me a picture and showed it to me, and it was the guy. And I was like, "That's the guy I talked to. He said he wasn't the Oracle." And she's like, "Oh no, the Oracle is a non-physical being. He channels that being. He asks that being questions. He's the intermediary between this three-dimensional plane and this other being. That's the Oracle, like living in whatever realm that is. But like, he's the guy, And it was just this moment for me where it's like, this is the guy that the Dalai Lama turns to for advice. So he's like the guy of guys, as it were, And he was so humble and so I didn't even know that it was him. And I was in his room to meet him, and I still didn't know it was him. And that was so inspiring for me to encounter someone who was so prestigious and yet didn't even let me see who he was. Didn't even let me know that it was actually him. Didn't care, didn't want it. And here I am wearing these monk robes, and I didn't wear these robes for fame or, acknowledgement of any kind. But I just had that moment where I was like, it's like a costume. I'm like wearing this costume, that people see me and they bow to me. "Oh, this is a monk. He's this thing." And to realize that there's this other path where you can just be completely like nondescript, and you can just be unassuming. And if people have eyes, they'll see you. If people are open to it, they'll recognize you. I go through most of my day with people that don't see me, and every now and then, I'll talk to somebody and they kind of, yeah, they see that there's something else going on. And there's something really nice about that. There's something that feels freeing to not need to be something. And it's difficult in that I am trying to, create impact in the world. And then I'm also trying to create finances for myself. That we live in a world that wants you to, or expects you to, or needs you to present yourself and to be this thing. And, one of my good friends, Helena, she says when she looks out over social media, she says, I see marketing over mastery. That the people that are getting all the money and all the clients, it's through marketing. They don't have the most to say. Often they don't. And the people that have a lot to say are often quiet, and they're often like not out there in the same way because they just don't have that bridge. And she looked at me, and she calls me monk. She's like, Monk, you were in the monastery for 8 years. These people went to like a weekend ayahuasca seminar, and they think that they're a shaman now. And she's like, these people don't understand, and I agree. And it is frustrating because I feel sometimes that I'm struggling to survive, and I'm kind of throwing my hands up, and I'm like, I didn't even have to leave the monastery. Like I left to be of service. And it's like, I can't even be of service because I'm now struggling to make ends meet. And it's just so strange how that is all put together, and how we're creating that together. That doesn't have to be. Like, I went to Burning Man a couple years ago, and it's just, everyone's just giving. It's like this whole community where people just offer each other. And it's almost this little like utopian thing in that sense of, why doesn't everyone just grow vegetables in their backyards or in their front yards and just share it with everyone else? Like, why do we make this really strange, tight, tribalistic covered wagons, everyone's your enemy, suspicious, mine culture worlds where we could be sharing? I mean, there's enough resources on this planet for everyone. There's enough. We throw away half the food that's produced in this country. There's enough for everyone. Yeah, it's just kind of interesting how we've decided to move forward collectively, and I'm hoping and I'm hopeful that, as things get potentially more decentralized through like blockchain technologies, and the thing we went to was about AI, but I feel that there's about to be this whole renaissance of ideas and understandings and we're right on the brink of it. And I'm confident that there's going to be new ways emerging of how to do everything, just necessarily so, because the power is not in anybody's hands anymore. There's nobody that's in control of this thing that's starting to happen. It's going to be happening everywhere. And new ways are emerging. They're birthing from within the crumbling old systems. And I see that all happening. And I don't know what it looks like yet. But we kind of get to choose what we focus on. Are we focused on the old system that's falling apart, that we're clinging to for life, and rules are getting more and more rigid, and politics are getting more and more polarized, and everything's getting louder, and the advertisements are coming, and all this stuff's coming in more and more and more? Or are we just deciding to connect with each other, to have dinners at each other's houses, to talk about things that are important to us, to create healthy events, to create podcasts and spread good messages? We really get to decide what reality we live in, what vibration we live in, more than most people realize, more than even I know still am experiencing. But heaven and hell, they are both right here. They're right here. You can find hell right now. You can find heaven right now. What are we focusing on? What are we creating? What are we generating more of vibrationally, energetically? And it's generally our focus. Our focus is what creates more of it, and that's kind of like this, one of my messages for everyone is is to focus on that hopefulness, to focus on, what is it going to feel like when things work out? What is it going to be like? What role do you want to play in that? In this new earth that can be birthed right now? How do we just start creating the thing? How do we become the ones that we've been waiting for, and start just doing the thing and not waiting for the structures that are, entrapping us to eventually crumble? It's like, no, like, how do we right now already just start creating what we want to see? And and I think that that's just such a rich area of exploration, is to see, how do I contribute to this world in a way that feels meaningful, that my children's children, that if rebirth is a thing when I come back in my next body, whatever it is, but that I can begin creating the world that I want to see, that I can be one node of that, and not be so concerned about how it's not what I want. Because it's very easy to look at the world and see how it's not what we want it to be, and to fall into depression and misery and resentment and rejection and resistance. And it brings a lot more to focus on what can I do, and what feels good for me to do, and how do I want to touch people, and what ripples do I want to make. And I've worked with thousands of people. I mean, I've affected the lives of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people directly. And I can only imagine the ripples of that. I can only imagine how the things that I've said have touched then the people around them and around them, and how it's just kind of about doing it. It's about just being it, doing it, being it, living it, not being so concerned with what's not happening in the world, how things are not the way we want. Because the loudest voice isn't necessarily the real voice. It's not necessarily reality, because the news and my Instagram and the people that are watching those things are telling me that, oh, there's all this war and there's this and there's that and all this stuff. And, I've been to countries that people say don't go to, and you go there and everyone's nice. Is that we live in such a conditioned state of apprehension that it's just not real, and it's not helpful. And so it's almost like, collectively, how do we shake ourselves up? How do we shake each other back awake to step back into our power, to take our power back? How do we take our power back individually, personally, in our own lives, and then collectively? And how do we create the things that we want, that we need, that we know other people need? And that's kind of where I'm at right now in my life, is trying to figure out how to make the impact, how to do the thing, how to spread the messages, how to re-inspire people. Thich Nhat Hanh, who was one of the teachers I studied with, he was Vietnamese, and he would write letters to all of the artists and the poets in the prisoner of war camps and the prisons, to try to re-inspire their hearts to create while in prison, and to share it. Because he's like, if we can get the artists and the poets to start dreaming again and start giving hope, he's like, we can lift everyone's spirits and we can change everything. It's like, how do we start re-inspiring the hearts of the people around us to feel safe, to feel like they matter, that they make a difference, that they can do something, that they have purpose. Kids in gangs, it's been proven that they're in gangs, but as soon as you give them purpose, you give them significance, you give them a job, they'll happily step away from that life if they can have something meaningful. You know, who's deciding this reality? It's us. You know, the biggest illusion is that there's this world and it is as it is, and we are now these like you know, subjects to that we just have to play this game. But the truth is that we are co-creators, that we can create a new game, we can create a new system, we can start whatever we want, and nothing's actually stopping us.
I am with you 1000%. We were actually having a similar conversation. That was so beautiful what you said, because you are right. Like we think things have to be the way they are. And it's like, does it? Do we have to do things like this? And, you know, but you're right. Like, no, we're just not awake to the fact, to our own power and who we really are. And I think you're exactly right. Just having this conversation we're having right now, and hopefully some other people listening and go, you know what? Yeah. Yeah. The ripple effect, right?
Yeah.
So it's, I think there's good things about maybe the way things are, but there's also not good things the way they are. And we all know that certain people at the top of these chains benefit greatly, and people that aren't there do not. So it's like, is that the best way to do things? So I think that's, I love how you told that story of, you know, just really getting people to awaken and have us talk to each other. And like you said, like with technology, it can go for better or for worse, right? But I would like to think, you know, how can this awaken us to a brand new way of living, to become the truest versions of ourselves, to know who we really are? And I've said it on this podcast several times, how many people go through life and never even knew who they truly were. You're just numb to social media and technology and programming and society, and you don't even know like what you could have or who you could have been. I think part of the gift is just at least taking that pause and like, oh, wait a minute. I'm not this, and this. I don't know what I am, but I know this ain't the path.
Yeah.
And at least going on that path. I know, Eric, you had a question, so I didn't want to.
Oh, no, I just wanted to say, it was just thank you for what you were talking about earlier. It's kind of serendipitous about the, your thoughts, and you know how you caught yourself about the ass. Like, you know, my thoughts on what that guy was doing at night. I was kind of having some thoughts about that recently, where like, you know, I noticed myself judging like my brother or whatever, and I'm like, oh, I know what he's doing here. And then I'm like, but does it serve me to think that's what he's doing here? It's like, ultimately I get to choose. So if I choose that, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, maybe nothing's ever true. But if I choose that, then I have the consequences of those like toxic thoughts. So ultimately we do have the choice to release those thoughts, or be like, oh, maybe that isn't it. Maybe I don't have an idea, and just kind of just be laissez-faire, so to speak, or just being like, I don't know what this person's thinking. It's like my ego or whatever thinks that it's probably doing this, this, and this, but like you ultimately could be poisoning yourself by thinking that and allowing those thoughts to have that breeding room to continue, because that affects your whole paradigm, how you see everything. So this is just really, serendipitous, because that's something I've been struggling with. So thank you for that.
Yeah. And sometimes also by having those thoughts, you create that.
Exactly. You perpetuate it. Oh yeah. You condition it to become that. Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah. Thoughts are super powerful. And then, but I had a fun question. You know, while you were a monk, and like you said, you weren't operating with money and stuff kind of going around. It's like, well, what did you eat on the day to day? Was it just whatever people were making? Like, was there certain foods, or was it like, yo, if a hamburger's there, I'm eating a hamburger? Or if it was like, no, man, like strictly vegan, or like, what was that like?
Yeah. So for the monastery in Germany that I was in, we received donations from the city as like a official religious organization. So we received like a lot of like the overstock from supermarkets and different stuff like that. We were vegetarian. And then, then they would make us food. We made our own tofu. And so it was just kind of, you know, whatever was being cooked for us there, we ate. Sometimes I cooked things too, right? So it's just kind of people eat whatever's there to eat.
So if like a Snickers bar showed up, like as long as it was like vegetarian, it'd be fair game?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
And then, then the monastery that I lived in Australia, which was a Thai forest monastery, it's a slightly different tradition, a little more strict. So every day the people would come to the monastery and bring food. And then that's what you got to eat. So you ate. Luckily, it was like a good community. So, there's days where it was like a hamburger and a thing. And it was just every day my bowl was full to the point where I even, went some days without eating. So I was just like, this is just so much food. And I'd only eat once a day there, and still was a lot. But traditionally, a monk was a beggar. So a monk would just walk around and they receive whatever is to be received. And they have to stop eating by noon, by the time the sun is directly overhead. So it gives this time window that the monk would walk into town with their bowl, and whether stand before people's doors, or some people would come out and wait with the food, and then they'd give the monk the food. And when the monk felt like he had enough food, he would walk back to wherever he was practicing, maybe in the nearby forest or whatever, and eat the food, wash the bowl, and then just keep going. So it was made to, a lot of the monk life, it's about simplicity and it's about making do. It's about enoughness, like wearing the robe, it's enough. It's enough. It's all you need. So eating once a day, it's enough. It's actually all you need. Eating whatever's given, it's enough, right? So it's all geared towards letting go of control, not being able to fulfill the desire to get whatever you want, whenever you want, to say, actually, like, this is enough. This food is enough. This clothes is enough. This is enough to live. The Buddha called it the middle way. That's like, if you ever hear the term the middle way in Buddhism, the Buddha was a prince. He lived in a royal house. He had everything he could imagine, everything he could ever want. And then when he left, he practiced with these guys that were like fasting and doing like really intense, rigorous like practices. And he said he got so skinny that like he could push his fingers into his stomach and feel his spine, and his hair was falling out and all the stuff, And he's like, I've tried it all. He's like, I've done it all. And he's like, at the end of the day, if your body's dead, you're not going to, your practice ends right there. And if you're too tired and weak and hungry, he's like, then you're also, so he said, it's the middle way. It's like, just enough. You just wear whatever you can that's just enough to survive, eat just whatever is enough to survive, sleep wherever is enough. So it's just about letting all of the basic human needs just be met, just enough. And then all the rest of that energy and time and focus can be spent in the practice. And that's kind of some of the framework of being a monk. It's only giving as much attention to that stuff as is necessary for the maintenance and continuity of the human body to then be able to keep practicing.
And that can apply to a lot of way to live in just regular life too, because we eat too much, we consume too much, we don't really need as much as what we think we do. And
Ajahn Brahm's teacher, Ajahn Chah, he was this amazing Thai forest monk. He's like there's amazing books about his teachings. But people would come, and the royal families would come. People would come and they'd offer him like jewels and statues and scripts and all this stuff. And one day, one of the monks was asked to clean his room, and he's like all excited because he has to like see all these things, And he went into his room, and there's nothing in there. It's just like a mat on the floor. And apparently, like, every time he would get something, the next person that would visit him, he would give them that thing. So like there would sometimes be like a nun who would come to his room to like, with like, just to like ask a question about meditation or something. And he'd like give her a jewel that like the king gave him like the day before, And it was just this like letting go, just giving everything he got, he just gave to the next person indiscriminately, didn't matter. Because he didn't want anything. He didn't have anything, didn't want anything. And stuff like that for me is just so inspiring. It's just, it just feels so right. Like, my heart just, even right now, it's like, I don't have a ton of stuff. And even I just gave a trash bag filled with clothes back to the Salvation Army, because I was like, I don't need it. Like, how much do I really need? My happiest times in life is when I was living out of a backpack, traveling through India for 2 years. Like, I had one pair of something, one sweatshirt, two, t-shirts. Like, I didn't have much, but you don't need much, it's nice to have more, but then it gets to the point where your energy field just gets so dense that you have all this stuff that things just get heavy and complicated,
Absolutely. And before I forget, so we're getting toward, we're gonna have to do part 2. 3 and 4. But I did want to address the questions that the audience, I think we may have already asked some. So one of them was, what made you change course away from the way of the monk? What was the one moment? I think you covered that.
Yeah, I didn't have like a moment per
Right.
se, but I just felt that, yeah, to continue to grow, I needed to leave.
Okay. And there's 2 more. What was the most rewarding thing about being a monk? If there was one.
Yeah, this whole process of cultivating myself and both healing and clearing out my past, and then also generating these positive qualities towards loving and helping and protecting and supporting and being gentle, and felt just that whole path of, they call it purification, or yeah, I don't know what the wording would be, but just taking these raw materials and really just creating these positive qualities and creating myself, creating this person in the way that I wanted, that I could be proud of who this person is and what he stood for and how he relates to the world, and to be in integrity, someone I can stand behind, to get that opportunity to craft myself. It's, again, one of those weird things, like, people don't realize that you get to create yourself and your personality. And we're just used to being this identity, and everyone around us knows us as this thing, and we just have this continuity of identity. But, when I lived in the monastery, my name was Hui Chuan, means wisdom turning. It's Vietnamese. So my name was, for a decade of my life, Hui Chuan is this Vietnamese thing, And so it's like, oh, just to change your name, to realize that you can build qualities within yourself. It's this amazing project. And it's also, one of the few projects that's like really worthwhile in that sense. It's like a garden. Like, I'm gardening right now in our home. We're growing peas and things, and to realize that you're a garden, and you get to tend to the seeds within yourself and to grow different qualities, and to watch them grow and be like, wow, like that thing used to trigger me and it doesn't anymore. Like, oh wow, like I'm feeling happy, and I used to feel depressed all day long. And to just realize that you're growing as a person, it's everything. Because you can be in the most beautiful external situation, but if you're internally not doing good, then you're in hell, it's in prison. And conversely, you could be in a not great external situation, but if you've done your work, if you feel good, it's like, it doesn't really faze you. You can still stay pretty even keeled, even in some pretty dire situations. So it's really seeing yourself as the project, as the work. And I feel grateful that my friends, they graduated college and they went and had kids and got jobs, just went off the traditional American route of family, home, and career. And I got to take a pause for a decade and just go inwards. I feel blessed for that opportunity. Why it came to me, I don't know.
What a gift. Wow. And then I think we had mentioned this one a little bit about, so is enlightenment possible? That was the question.
Yeah, from my experience, yes.
And how would you describe enlightenment?
Well, the Buddhist enlightenment, it's a liberation from identity. It's the experience of these different moving processes. It's shifting from experiencing yourself as the cloud to the sky. It's just that experience of freedom from conditionings. And it's a feeling of peace, a feeling of liberation. It's something that I often say in my classes. It's like, if you look over at the ocean and you see a wave, that wave looks like it's its own thing, but that wave it's just the ocean. It's just made of water, salt water. It's the same thing. So that wave, realizing that it's the ocean, that wave reconnecting to the truth that it's made of everything, that it's arising from this stuff. It goes back into that stuff. It's not separate. Even though a wave seems like it's its own thing, it's not. It's just the ocean. So to create that experience, to recognize that we are nature, we are the universe, we are all of this stuff, but we experience ourselves as being separate. We experience individuality. So the spiritual path, if truth is oneness, if truth is that all of this is just universe, all of this is just nature, all of this is the same stuff, all of the waves are just water. If that's truth, that means illusion is individuality. Illusion is separateness. So the spiritual path, enlightenment, it's that shift from experiencing a solid, individual, separate self to experiencing the universe in the grain of rice, but experiencing yourself as that grain of rice, experiencing how you are in this moment and every moment continuously being created, manifested, shifted by the universe, which is you. And then that's just this, it's just this freedom. There's nothing anymore. It's just this, and it's the associated peace and liberation that comes with that.
Thank you. Well, Seth, I thank you for coming here. I'm so glad that we all met, and this has been a beautiful conversation. And I know we probably only barely scratched the surface. I always give the guests the last word, but before we do, two things. Could you explain what you brought tonight here?
I brought a Buddha statue. This is a statue that I first received in I think 2013 from Nepal, from Kathmandu. There's something called the Monkey Temple, which is this beautiful temple up on this hill with prayer wheels and different stuff. And I was praying and I turned a corner and the statue there was a vendor sitting there and there was just this beam of sunlight coming down and just hitting this one statue. And just felt that it was important. And I carried the statue with me to all the different holy places in India, all the different Buddhist sites where the Buddha gained enlightenment, where he was born, where he passed away, where he gave his first teaching. And eventually I found myself up in the Himalayas with the Tibetans, this monastery called Rumtek. It was like, me and 5,000 Tibetan monks, kind of just middle of nowhere. And Sikkim, it's kind of near like Bhutan and Nepal. It's all the way up there. And I had made a friend, and he let me sleep on the floor of his room in this monastery, this monk. And I had taken the statue and put it on top of his bookshelf. And when I was ready to leave that monastery, I felt like this, he felt happy there. So I left the statue there. And about a year, or maybe even a couple of years later, I connected with the monk on Facebook and we chatted. And I was like, "Do you still have that statue?" And he was trying to like raise funds for something. And I was like, "You know what? Like, I'll send you a couple $100 to help support you and your thing." And like, as an exchange, like, yeah, like technically like, yeah, like I'll pay for the, but it's like, yeah, I'll love to support you. And I'd love to pay you to send me that statue back. So I just sent a few $100s over to him to help him like with his studies and his book and his life over there. And he ended up giving the statue to some of the higher up monks, and they carved out the bottom and they filled it with scrolls, with mantras, and I don't even know what else, substances. And then they sealed off the bottom, and then he sent it to me. So it's this just like super blessed statue that's been with me for a while. Just carrying a lot of, really encoded with a lot of important vibrations. And yeah, things like that are meaningful to me. They're good little energetic anchors that I like to keep in my fields.
It was perfect for tonight,
Yeah.
especially. And so if people want to get a hold of you, learn more about you, work with you, where are the best places for people to go?
So sethmonk.com. So I made a website. I offer different kinds of sessions, one-on-one, kind of transformational containers is the thing that I really go deep with people individually who are ready to make the shift. And otherwise, on Spotify, I have a couple hundred free talks on meditation, and on YouTube. I have some videos, and I go live every Tuesday night on my Facebook, Tuesday Night Lives, I call them. And if you're in LA, I teach in a couple different places here. But yeah, I'd say for sure, just reach out, sethmonk.com. There's a little, contact form. And yeah, I'm happy to help whoever needs it, and also really looking for ways to create a larger impact. So if there's anybody listening, I'm looking for ways to collaborate and to create a bigger impact and to really help the people that need it, as I'm looking out over the masses of humanity, just how to create the biggest impact possible. And that's something that I definitely could use some support with.
Okay, awesome. And all the social media connected on your website?
Yeah, it's Seth Monk on Instagram, Seth Monk on Facebook.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. And before I give you the last word, Eric, did you have any final thoughts?
No, just thank you for your time. Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, this was quite the experience, and I always give the guests the last word. You've already given so many great stories and insights, but what would you like to leave us with?
Yeah, if everyone could just take a deep breath, maybe close your eyes for a second. As you take a really deep breath in through the nose, down to the belly, out through the mouth, just taking a moment to feel the space around you, to allow yourself to become bigger, to allow yourself to become more. See if you can even feel the space beyond the room, feel the space of the sky, beyond the earth, connecting to the stars. Just allow yourself to expand. And as you breathe into that, even just for a moment, just let yourself dissolve and let yourself become all of it. Jangchug Sencho Rinpoche, Makipanam Gikirche, Kipimip Mapayang, Gundagundu Felwasho, Tony Dara Rinpoche, Makipanam Gikirche, Kipimip Mapayang, Gundagundu Felwasho. May the precious mind of enlightenment that has arisen continue to arise and grow. May that which has arisen not decrease, but increase more and more. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Hi, everyone. Sam Dever, the Sam Dever Podcast here, and I just want to thank you for checking out this episode. To watch and listen to future episodes, be sure to follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@thesamdeverpodcast. Thank you so much. See you soon.